Now, there are so many models that could be used for the analysis or can be used as analysis models. And there is no particular standard as to which model has to be included in the analysis or not. Okay, if you look at the guide, the BA guide, you'll see that there are a lot of recommended models. All of them could be used. Okay, and we're going to talk about a lot of like example extra models later on. There is a lecture for extra models. But there is no standard what must be included in the analysis of the requirements. But there are some recommendations, like this CoreX process, okay? They have a recommendation of using these 5 models to give you a minimal, sufficient understanding of your system, knowing that you're going to add the details later. So since we are going to use a Scrum, if we create these 5 models, this is sufficient to get us started. So to get us create the user stories that would be the initial backlog so that we can start the process. And then once we start the sprints, every sprint we take some of the user stories or some of the requirements that we identified in order to refine it and add details to it. But for that initial stage, the initial stage of requirements that will supposed to give us a general overview, it is sufficient to have these 5 models. That's the recommendation here. Okay, and we're gonna follow this recommendation at least to have something. Again, it's not a standard, so you can take this as a starting point, and you can, as you build your own experience, you can add or modify or remove from it. Okay, so what are these 5 models that are recommended? The first one is called the domain model. In the domain model, you just summarize what you learned in the elicitation stage in a conceptual model. A very popular tool to create conceptual models is the mind maps. In the previous lecture, we created mind maps to summarize the content of the week. Okay, it's a very popular tool to create conceptual models. All right, so we can use it to create the domain model that summarizes what we learned in the elicitation stage. The general rule for all the models that we're going to, not all of them, most of the models that we're going to talk about within this recommended 5 models are supposed to be created progressively, okay, and if possible, in hierarchical decomposition up to 3 levels, with 4 or 5 elements in each level. So here in the domain model, we're talking about concepts. So 4 to 5 concepts in 3 levels. So total 15. Okay, now how does that look like? Here's an example for a system to be created for a government agency. Now this is level 1. Here, this is the main concept here. The main concept, the core concept of this system is a government regulator. Now, what are the main concepts that are sub-concept of that core? Okay, so we have a core concept, and these 4 are sub-concepts of it. Okay, and these are the main categories under the government regulator, main categories of concepts under a government regulator. So what does progressively mean? First, we start with level 1. So we start with a core concept, and then level 1, we have the main categories under this concept, or the main sub-concepts under this concept. Okay, so here we have regulating the financial and real economy, supporting the business life cycle, managing the legal and economic infrastructure, and informing the public. See, these are the main concepts here. Okay. The second level, now the recommendation is to keep the level at 4 or 5 elements each, but it's the recommendation, right? So here we follow the recommendation. We have 4, but it can be less, it can be more. It's not a standard or a forced rule, it's just a general recommendation. Okay, now how do we go from level 1 to level 2? Because this is how level 2 look like. Now, the advantage of having this hierarchical model is that you can focus on one particular aspect without losing the big picture. So here, so from level 1, we focused on one of the concepts in level 1 and then created or derived or came up with the sub-concepts of that. Okay, so we focused on supporting the business life cycle, and the sub-concepts of that would be informing, starting, and so on. Okay, so we are focused on this particular concept, but we know how it is related to the other, so through the relation of the core concept. Okay, so the big picture is still in mind, why we have particular zoom in or focus on one of the concepts in order to add more details to it. Okay, and then once we're done with this, we can cover up the details and focus on another aspect here. Now, if you have an interactive tool like the one I used for in the lecture last time, I will share this tool with you so that you can use it. It can help you zoom in and zoom out as you need. Okay, so now we still have the big picture in mind. You can see the big picture, but now we have a particular focus on one concept and we can break it down to its sub-concepts. And so again, here we look into this one concept, and based on the information that we have collected in the elicitation, we can break it down into its own sub-concepts. All right, so we end up with this level 2. And then how can we move in from level 2 to level 3? It's pretty much the same process. It keeps going progressively. So we just focus on one of them. Let's say we focus on registry services. And based on the documents that we have, based on what we collected and learned in the elicitation, we try to figure out what are the sub-concepts under that registry services. And then once we're done, we go to another concept, let's say information on economic activity. And based on what we collected and what we learned in the elicitation, we break it down into its sub-concepts. And so on, it keeps going like that. All right? So just like the same way we moved from the core concepts, let's call it level 0 to level 1, we moved from level 1 to level 2, and we can keep going with the more and more levels. Now here, I guess you can summarize all what we learned in the elicitation process in this mind map. Okay, if you can go more than level 3, go ahead. If the information is available for you, generally speaking, level 3 is sufficient. But here we have summarized all what we've learned. Now we have a visual representation of that. It would be easier for us or more reliable for us to determine the scope based on that summary. Okay, if you have already learned about the scope in the elicitation, now it's a good way to verify what you've learned. Or if you didn't learn about the scope in early stage, now it's a good way for you to define it, since you have a visual summary of all what you have collected in the elicitation. Now, if the mind map is not very attractive to you, or you don't have a good tool for it, or you want to use another tool, there is a model called the system structure model that gives you pretty much the same view. It gives you the hierarchical point of view, and it gives you pretty much the same result.